Have you ever wondered what happens in your mind when you think? It's not just a solo activity. You're actually listening to your own thoughts. We often think of our minds as a quiet place for deep reflection, but in reality, we're constantly absorbing sounds, words, and ideas, even in silence. In this article, we'll explore how thinking is a dynamic process tied closely to what we hear, shaping not just our decisions, but our entire worldview. We'll dive into the science behind this connection, uncover the role of external stimuli, and discover how our thoughts are deeply influenced by what we listen to. The science behind thinking and listening, building on the idea that our thoughts are not just born in silence, let's explore how thinking and listening work hand in hand at a deeper, scientific level. When we think, our brain is actually processing internal sounds, like an ongoing inner dialogue. Have you ever caught yourself talking in your head? That's your brain actively listening to its own thoughts, engaging with the world around you, and creating a running commentary. Imagine a moment in your life when you were struggling to make a big decision. Maybe it was a job offer in another city or an important personal relationship. What happened in those moments? Did you feel as if your mind was racing, pulling in past advice, conversations, or snippets of what you've heard in your life? This is the very essence of our brain working like a radio receiver, tuning into everything it has heard before, whether we're conscious of it or not. The brain's auditory cortex plays a key role in this process. It doesn't just process sounds we hear externally. It also activates when we engage in thinking aloud in our minds. So, when we reflect on something, we are essentially listening to our own internal voice and replaying ideas we've absorbed over time. Our inner monologue can act like a conversation with ourselves, but it's heavily influenced by what we've heard from others. Neuroscientific research shows that our brain constantly evaluates external sounds and stores them in various regions, like memories of advice from loved ones, teachers, or even media. Over time, these stored sounds become intertwined with our thoughts, making it challenging to separate original ideas from those influenced by outside sources. Let me share a personal story. A friend of mine, Sarah, was at a crossroads in her career. She had the option of taking a high-paying job in a big city, but the emotional pull of staying close to family was strong. The more Sarah thought about her options, the more she realized she was replaying conversations she'd had over the years. Her parents' advice about stability, her mentor's guidance on taking risks, and even casual chats with friends about pursuing happiness over wealth. Sarah wasn't just thinking about the job, she was actively listening to these external voices echoing in her mind. In fact, she was in a constant conversation with herself, influenced by all these past inputs. The brain doesn't just listen to the past, it actively merges it with the present to create new thoughts, decisions, and emotions. This internal dialogue can shape our beliefs, guide our actions, and even alter how we perceive the world. Thinking and listening are inseparable because one cannot exist without the other. Every thought you have is a reflection of something you've heard or experienced, and your brain's ability to process these sounds and integrate them into your thinking can deeply influence your choices. This connection between thinking and listening is a profound realization. It's a reminder that our minds are always at work, synthesizing external sounds into our internal world. It's not just the physical act of hearing that shapes our thoughts, it's how those sounds resonate within us, influencing everything from our actions to our very identity. The role of external stimuli in shaping our thoughts, as we've just explored, thinking is not a solitary process. It's shaped by the inner dialogue formed from the external sounds we absorb. But what happens when we consider the vast array of external stimuli that constantly surround us? What we listen to every day, whether we realize it or not, molds our thinking and influences the choices we make. It's not just the conversations we have or the books we read, but also the subtle background noises and media we encounter that impact how we perceive the world and process information. Think about a time when you were scrolling through social media, hearing a new piece of news that immediately sparked an emotional reaction, whether excitement, fear, or frustration. Your mind processed that information, but what you might not realize is how the tone, the context, and the emotions of that media piece were absorbed into your thinking. It's like a conversation you never directly participated in, but one that still shapes your mental framework. Our brains don't just passively absorb information. We actively listen to these external stimuli and integrate them into our thoughts. Take the rise of social media influencers, for instance. In today's world, they can influence not just how we think about fashion, beauty, or politics, but even how we form our values and self-worth. I remember a moment when my cousin, Jessica, who had always been confident, started feeling insecure about her body image after following influencers who only posted perfect pictures. At first, she didn't even notice the gradual shift in her thoughts, but over time, the constant images and messages she was exposed to created a mental shift in how she saw herself. Her inner dialogue, once full of self-love, became clouded with doubts and comparisons. This story isn't unique. Many of us unknowingly allow external stimuli like media, advertisements, and even the people we interact with daily to shape how we think about ourselves and the world. Similarly, think of the power of conversations with family, friends, or colleagues. Have you ever had a meaningful discussion that challenged your perspective? Or maybe you found yourself repeating an opinion or idea that someone else once voiced, not because it was your own, but because it resonated deeply with you at that moment. What we hear from others, even in passing, plants seeds in our minds that grow into complex thoughts and beliefs. The key here is that we are always listening to the world around us, and these sounds, whether intentional or unintentional, shape the way we think. Sometimes we think we are thinking our own thoughts, but much of that thinking is based on a lifetime of external influences. Our ideas about success, relationships, beauty, and even what is right or wrong are often rooted in what we've heard, seen, and internalized from those around us. The external stimuli we are exposed to can be both empowering and limiting. In an ideal world, we'd be conscious of the media we consume, the conversations we engage in, and the environments we put ourselves in. By carefully selecting the sounds that feed into our minds, we have the power to actively shape our thoughts. But to do that, we must first recognize just how deeply external influences affect us, and start tuning in to what we're truly listening to. Why we aren't always aware of our listening habits as we've discovered, external stimuli constantly shape our thoughts, whether it's through conversations, media, or even subtle background noise. But here's the twist. Most of us aren't aware of just how much we're listening, or how deeply it impacts our thinking. The truth is, much of what we hear slips by unnoticed, and without even realizing it, we allow those unspoken influences to quietly mold our internal world. We're constantly listening, but how often do we stop to notice what we're actually taking in? Think about the last time you were walking through a busy street, sitting in a coffee shop, or even working from home. The sounds around you, the chatter, music, traffic, even the buzz of your phone, are all feeding into your mind. Yet, if someone asked you what you heard in that moment, you'd likely struggle to recall it. We've become so accustomed to the noise around us that it's easy to forget how it's impacting our thoughts. This phenomenon is often referred to as background noise, and it's an area where our minds go on autopilot. Let me tell you a story about Emma, a close friend who recently went through a transformation. Emma had always been an optimist, full of energy and positive thoughts about the future. But over the course of a few months, she started to feel more and more disconnected from that cheerful energy. One day, she realized that her conversations had mostly shifted to negative topics. Whether it was conversations at work, media she consumed, or even chats with friends, the underlying tone had changed from uplifting to stressed and pessimistic. She hadn't noticed the gradual shift until she had a moment of reflection. Her listening habits had subconsciously drifted toward negativity, and as a result, her thoughts were beginning to mirror that. Emma's story is a powerful reminder of how easily we can become unaware of the mental clutter we absorb. It's not that she was choosing negativity, it was simply a result of the listening habits she had developed without even realizing it. Over time, this constant exposure to negative messages started influencing her thinking patterns, and her inner dialogue became dominated by fear, doubt, and stress. Emma wasn't alone in this. Many of us unknowingly allow the constant influx of negative stimuli to shape how we view ourselves and the world around us. This lack of awareness is why it's so important to pay attention to what we're listening to, both actively and passively. Even if you think you're not listening, your brain is always processing, absorbing, and storing information. Whether it's a passing comment, a headline on a news article, or a background song on the radio, each of these elements has the potential to influence your thoughts in ways you may not even notice. This is especially true in a world where information is constantly being thrown at us. The challenge, then, is not just to be more conscious of what we listen to, but to be mindful of how those sounds are affecting our internal world. When we become aware of the subtle yet powerful impact of our listening habits, we can take control of the mental noise that clouds our thinking. By actively choosing the sounds that align with our values and support our growth, we can begin to transform our thinking and cultivate a more positive, intentional mindset. How our thoughts are shaped by what we hear, following from the idea that we often aren't fully aware of the impact of our listening habits. Let's dive into how exactly what we hear shapes our thoughts. The sounds and words we absorb, both consciously and unconsciously, leave an indelible mark on our thinking, beliefs, and even our identities. Every day, we are bombarded with messages that subtly influence how we view the world and ourselves. From the advice of friends to the tone of a podcast, from news reports to casual chats in the workplace, the external stimuli we encounter directly affect our internal world. Take the example of Anna, a young woman who had always been independent and confident. She had built her career from the ground up, always pushing herself to succeed. But when she started listening to a series of motivational podcasts, her thoughts began to shift in unexpected ways. Initially, the podcasts inspired her to work harder, dream bigger, and achieve more. But over time, Anna realized that her inner dialogue was changing. She found herself constantly comparing her achievements to those of the influencers she admired, and she became increasingly discontent with her progress. The more she listened to success stories, the more she felt inadequate. She wasn't measuring her progress against her own goals anymore. She was measuring it against an idealized version of success presented by the voices she was listening to. What had started as motivation gradually turned into a source of self-doubt. This example highlights how our thoughts aren't isolated from the external world. We often think we are having original thoughts, but in reality, we're simply reflecting the ideas, beliefs, and messages we've heard. The voices we surround ourselves with, whether through media, conversations, or even advertisements, infiltrate our mental space and influence our worldview. We internalize what we hear, and these external influences shape our beliefs about success, happiness, relationships, and even who we are. It's not just motivational speakers or influencers who shape our thoughts. Often, it's the casual conversations we have with the people closest to us. For instance, if you grew up in an environment where success was defined by wealth or status, chances are those values will deeply influence how you measure your own achievements. Likewise, if your circle often speaks negatively about others, those thoughts can seep into your own thinking and alter your perspective. Whether it's the media you consume or the voices of loved ones, what you hear becomes a filter through which you view the world. The reality is, we're constantly listening to others, whether we realize it or not. And this listening becomes an integral part of how we think. Our thoughts often aren't as original as we might like to believe. They're shaped by the information and messages we've absorbed over time. It's like a mental playlist that plays on repeat, guiding our beliefs, choices, and actions. So, while it's impossible to stop listening, the key is to become mindful of what we're absorbing and how it's shaping us. By actively curating the voices and messages we allow into our minds, we have the power to shape our thoughts in a way that aligns with our values and aspirations. The next time you feel uncertain or influenced by external opinions, remember that you can take control of your listening habits and, in turn, your thinking. Can we control what we listen to, and why does it matter? Building on the realization that our thoughts are influenced by the external stimuli we absorb, the next natural question is, can we control what we listen to, and if so, why does it matter? The short answer is yes. We can control what we listen to. But it's not just about making a choice. It's about taking charge of our mental environment and shaping our thoughts in a way that supports our personal growth and well-being. The voices we allow into our lives directly influence our mindset, decisions, and emotions. In a world where we're constantly plugged into podcasts, social media, news cycles, and conversations, the ability to curate what we listen to is more important than ever. Consider the story of Alex, a young entrepreneur who found himself caught in a spiral of stress and self-doubt. As his business grew, so did the pressure. Every day, he listened to success stories and motivational speakers, hoping to fuel his drive. But the more he consumed this content, the more he felt like he was falling behind. His inner dialogue became filled with not enough and not doing it fast enough. It wasn't the motivational messages that were the problem. It was the overwhelming flood of content that constantly set the bar higher and higher until it left him feeling inadequate. What Alex needed wasn't more external validation or success stories. He needed to create space for silence, reflection, and a new perspective. This story isn't uncommon. We're often unaware of how the content we consume, whether it's the daily news cycle, influencer culture, or even casual office chatter, shapes our mental state. We might think we're simply keeping up or staying informed, but in reality, we're continuously absorbing messages that may not align with our true desires or well-being. That's why being intentional with our listening is crucial. The good news is that we can control what we listen to, and by doing so, we can protect our mental space and guide our thoughts toward positivity, growth, and clarity. The power to curate our listening habits lies in being mindful of what's entering our minds. It means choosing the podcasts, books, and conversations that uplift us instead of drag us down. If the constant stream of negative news makes us anxious, we can limit exposure and instead focus on content that fosters hope and resilience. If we find that certain people's opinions or the content we consume makes us feel inferior, we have the agency to shift our focus and spend time with voices that inspire and encourage us. But controlling what we listen to isn't just about avoiding negativity. It's about creating an environment where our thoughts are nourished by what aligns with our values and goals. It's about choosing content that challenges us to grow, learn, and evolve, rather than mindlessly consuming whatever comes our way. In fact, actively choosing what we listen to can lead to a more grounded, confident mindset. When we expose ourselves to voices of wisdom, authenticity, and positivity, our thoughts begin to reflect those same qualities. Ultimately, controlling what we listen to matters because it shapes our reality. What we hear influences how we think, feel, and act. By taking control of our listening habits, we empower ourselves to shape a mental landscape that fosters clarity, peace, and growth. So the next time you find yourself overwhelmed by external influences, take a step back and decide, what do I choose to listen to, and how can it help me become the best version of myself? The transformative power of intentional listening. Continuing from the idea that we can control what we listen to, let's explore the transformative power of intentional listening. The truth is, when we consciously choose what we allow into our minds, we set the stage for profound personal growth. Intentional listening isn't just about avoiding negativity. It's about actively curating the messages that feed our minds and align with our goals, values, and aspirations. By carefully choosing the voices and content we expose ourselves to, we create a mental environment where our thoughts can thrive and where we can foster positive change in our lives. Think about the story of Michael, a man who spent years living in the shadow of self-doubt. His job was stressful, his personal relationships strained, and he often felt like he was simply going through the motions. One day, he decided to make a small but significant change. He began listening to podcasts about mindfulness and personal development, ones that focused on self-compassion, gratitude, and resilience. At first, it felt like a challenge to shift his mindset, especially after years of absorbing negative self-talk. But as the days passed, something began to shift. The positive messages he was hearing slowly started to replace the internal criticisms he had grown accustomed to. Slowly, his thoughts began to change. Michael became more present in his daily life, more connected to his emotions, and more confident in his abilities. What was the catalyst? It wasn't just the content itself, but his decision to actively choose to listen to something that nurtured his well-being and growth. Michael's story illustrates the incredible potential of intentional listening. When we choose to surround ourselves with empowering messages, whether through podcasts, audiobooks, conversations, or even the music we listen to, we can transform our mindset. The sounds and voices we invite into our lives shape our thoughts and, ultimately, our reality. Imagine the difference it could make if we actively listened to messages of self-love, growth, and possibility, rather than allowing ourselves to be bombarded by negativity or self-limiting beliefs. Intentional listening goes beyond simply absorbing information. It involves tuning into content that inspires, challenges, and encourages us to be our best selves. It's about choosing voices that uplift us, rather than drown us in doubt or fear. By listening to individuals who encourage us to push boundaries, embrace challenges, and view setbacks as opportunities for growth, we are programming our minds for success. This practice of intentional listening isn't limited to just content consumption. It also applies to how we engage with the people in our lives. Think about the conversations you have with your friends, family, or colleagues. Are they uplifting? Do they encourage you to think more positively, or do they reinforce doubts and negativity? By intentionally choosing to engage with people who inspire and support us, we ensure that the voices we listen to in our daily lives promote our growth and well-being. The power of intentional listening is transformative because it enables us to rewrite the internal narratives that shape our lives. It's a conscious choice to feed our minds with positivity, empowerment, and wisdom, rather than letting them be shaped by external noise and unhelpful influences. So, take a moment today to reflect on what you're listening to, whether it's the content you consume or the conversations you engage in. Are they empowering you? Are they helping you become the best version of yourself? If not, it's time to take control and transform your listening habits. After all, the power to shape our thoughts lies in the sounds we choose to let into our minds. If you enjoyed this video and feel inspired by the powerful impact of intentional listening, don't forget to hit that like button. Sparkling Heart, your feedback means the world to us, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us. We love hearing from you. Glowing Star, and hey, if you found this video helpful, make sure you don't miss out on our other amazing content. There's so much more to explore. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring video. Let's keep this conversation going and continue this journey together. Keep listening, growing, and evolving. Your thoughts are your power. Sparkles.